importance of cybersecurity, especially for startups. So without further ado, I will turn it over now to Chris. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk to this audience. As Wendy alluded to, my focus is security. I spend a lot of my time talking largely to security folks and to folks I work with as my customers. And it's always really fun to get outside of the usual silo that I'm in and talk to a different audience. And very, very happy to offer some, hopefully insights and guidance to you guys today that maybe you haven't heard, or maybe new spins on things that you have. As you can see on the screen here, that this part of our series that we're doing really focused on startups. And the reason for that, we've just seen there's a lot of need there. I've had a growing amount of folks I'm working with who are in the startup space. And I feel that there's been increasing pressure to really do more for security, right? From your customers, from regulators. I'm going to talk more specifics on those things and why some of that's happening here. But it seemed like it was smart to maybe reach out and try to put more information in the hands of folks like yourselves and help you be a little bit better armed and understand a little bit better what you're walking into as security is coming up more and more. So again, part of a series today, it's going to speak kind of these things. Why should I even care about security, right? Doesn't make me money, right? It's not my core product, but if it's not going to, show value back to stakeholders in my company, then there ought to be a reason that we're doing it. And I will hopefully give you good reasons today. Wendy covered a little bit of this. I've got a slide here that just touches on the whole family of companies and how we tie together. So obviously you've just heard a little bit about River, which Wendy knows far better than I do. I'm with MRK. The whole family of companies here is True West. And we've been around for 30 or so years. We've got our fingers in a lot of different areas. MRK itself is a value-added reseller. We sell products. We have the CISO practice, which I run, which we'll talk a little more about. We've got the MSSP that does monitoring. TRG is involved in the point-of-sale business and is international. They've got offices over in Europe and in Canada and all over the U.S. And gives a lot of interesting perspective on the retail and manufacturing verticals when I interact with those guys. Very, very broad business. And then Sibling Revelry Brewing is the most fun part of the family. It's actually a craft brewery that is owned by the same family that owns the rest of these companies. We do a lot of events there here in Cleveland. And if anybody needs hooked up with some craft beer, feel free to reach out, and I can probably coordinate that too. It's definitely the most exciting part of what we do. People would rather talk beer than security, I've found. I alluded to the CISO practice. So again, that's what I do. That's why I'm here talking to you guys. It's probably helpful to understand a little bit of what that means before I kind of dive into some of my other more detailed stuff. What we really do there, we work as the security officers for a bunch of different companies. I've been in-house as a banker. I've been a part-time CISO for a lot of different organizations and different verticals: healthcare, manufacturing, retail, you name it, technology for sure. And what we do in that practice is basically have a team of individuals that are focused on that role. A lot of consulting firms do assessments. Our group's really focused on being part-time CISOs, and that's really the experience I bring to the table here. I'm literally the one who's getting audited when we go through things like SOC 2, or when customers send questionnaires asking a million security questions of one of my customers. I have to fill that out, and I have to explain to their customer why we think we're doing a good job with security. So that's the experience I'll be drawing on here. It's something I've done for a couple of decades, as have the other guys on the team. And that last little blurb at the bottom, we've worked a lot with technology startups. So that's a big part of why we're bringing this content here today. I mentioned managed security. That's our sister practice. These guys do 24/7 monitoring. So they're kind of eyes and ears. They're the alarm system inside of networks. We have a lot of shared customers. They kind of expand upon what I can do out of the CISO practice. So a little bit of who am I? Wendy gave me a great intro. That's me on the slide. If you're not seeing me on webcam here, I head up our CISO practice, as I mentioned. And as I mentioned too, I've got my fingers in all these different kinds of companies. I used to be with National City and PNC Bank. I was there through the acquisition, and then took my first foray into consulting. So I've been in very, very big environments. I know very well what the vendor management and security programs look like there. But I've also done a lot of work in very small environments, as small as I think the smallest is I have a customer working with the last few months that he was the first employee. He was a founder, and he had a contract with a client that was going to start in a couple of months, and we helped him get jump started. So anywhere from 60,000 employees down to 1 is the breadth of what we've been involved in. That's me on the slide. I'm an amateur Ironman. I'm very involved in triathlons. That's just a lot of what I do outside of work. I find that gives me a good mindset for the security work. The two interrelate much more than you'd imagine. So, having said all that, why should I care about security, right? Why does it matter in the first place? I apologize. I'm going to move my little GoToMeeting window to the side so I can read what I'm saying. So incidents, right? So we all know that there's been more and more incidents. We all read the news. We've got state level actors that are targeting different organizations, right? There's everybody here heard about all the stuff with the government agencies and SolarWinds and Microsoft that happened not too long ago. A couple decades ago, this wasn't a tool. It's now a very, very well-honed tool in any large nation states or even some smaller nation states toolbox. They're using cyber attacks for espionage and an advantage for their homegrown industries. Breaches are happening all over the place outside of that, right? The organized crime wants their information, your credit card numbers, your date of birth, your driver's license number. All these things are very valuable. And as I start to talk about regulations, you're wondering, well, why are we getting more and more of this? Well, because the stuff's getting stolen. It's getting stolen for a reason, and it's causing damage. This is from a website called informationisbeautiful.net. If you go there, this is all dynamic. It's animated. You can roll over any of these big balls and they will tell you a lot more about the incident. And what you're looking at is visual representations of a bunch of publicly disclosed incidents that we know about that have happened over the last few years. I think on the screen here, I've just got through about 2016. You can scroll down more on the site. The bigger the little ball is, the more records were exposed. And you notice I use that word publicly disclosed. So these are ones we know about because of privacy laws, because of PCI, because of HIPAA. There are mandatory disclosures required at a state level and at other regulatory levels. And that's how we know about a lot of these things. That's why I read them in the news. Something that comes up a lot is, well, it seems like intellectual property theft doesn't happen, right? It's just people's personal information that gets stolen. And the thing is, it's the personal information that we have to be told about. If you are a large, to use an example, let's say it's Coca-Cola. If somebody steals the formula for how to make Coca-Cola, there isn't a law that says they have to tell us that. They may or may not feel they have some obligation to notify their shareholders, being a public company. They may or may not choose to tell us, but many times with intellectual property theft, there's no reason that we have to be publicly disclose that something happened. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of incentive not to. So it's one of the things I always like to share is that's grossly underreported. There absolutely are some examples. You usually don't hear about it unless it's prosecuted, which is pretty rare. SolarWinds, I alluded to, we've all heard about this thing, right? For anybody who hasn't or hasn't kept up to date on the details, the gist of this is SolarWinds is a vendor that provided, among other things, IT network monitoring for a massive amount of companies. They've really been the player for how to tell if my servers are all up for a long time. And the bad guys, which the U.S. government has said they strongly believe was the Russian intelligence agencies, they were able to breach SolarWinds, insert malicious pieces of code into their product without being detected. And then this ultimately gave them remote access into all of their customers. A scenario a lot of us would have hypothetically talked about a few years ago as being very plausible. Now it happened in a very big way. It was used to compromise a number of government agencies. It gave them access to a lot of Fortune 500 companies. This is a big deal in my circles. It's kind of rolled out of the main news cycle a little bit, but it's probably something we'll be talking about a year or two from now. And I'm seeing a lot of interesting things where people are doing research and other things to try to figure out how do we stop this kind of attack. It's a very difficult attack to stop. Any of you who are startups who are creating software, you know full well, you don't have a team of people who are probably full-time, doing code audits and manually looking for anything that possibly might have been submitted that shouldn't have been there. You're just trying to make the product work. Even somebody with the resources of SolarWinds, they couldn't stop this. What hope do you really have, right? And that's something I'll talk a little bit more about too, is what's realistic and reasonable for how we should defend ourselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about different kinds of incidents, right? So I've mentioned, a few examples here. This is just kind of my list that I think is, hopefully relatively understandable for this group. Phishing, we've all heard about, right? The way I like to explain that, anytime I'm using an email to try to trick one of my employees into giving up something they shouldn't, to do something unsafe, could be going to my malicious website, could be giving up passwords, it could be anything that's probably bad for them. Frankly, this is probably my biggest attack vector when I'm involved in penetration tests. This is the first thing we'll always try if we're allowed to, because it's very successful. Even with all our email filters and different things, okay, they'll stop, obviously malicious stuff, but if I'm a human being targeting other human beings, there's a lot of ways for me to be clever to try to get them to do something they probably don't want to do. Ransomware, right? We've all heard about this one. We're all really sick of hearing about it. Every CIO and CEO I talked to was worried about it. Basically, the idea is somehow malware gets on my system, encrypts my data, asks for a ransom. The ransoms are getting to be in the millions of dollars at this point. They keep going up every year because they're very successful. This is something we should be worried about. Even if your stuff's in the cloud, depending on how you've set it up, just because we're using Microsoft or Amazon or Google or whoever to host, doesn't mean we're automatically immune to this. And one of the things is they are more and more not just encrypting the data and offering ransom for that. Because people are getting better at restoring from backups, they are stealing the data as well. They didn't used to do that because it's more work. It wasn't worth the effort. But now most times they'll make a copy of at least a portion of your stuff. And okay, you can restore from backup. That's great. But how valuable was the data I now have a copy of? Targeted human attacks, right? A lot of these things are automated, right? Any of these things I'm talking about, the first two could be a human, but honestly, most ransomware attacks are just a shotgun approach. If somebody specifically targets your company, they're going to try different kinds of attacks that are going to be more unique to you and may look to more exploit the software you use, the things of value to your business, especially if you sell technology that's used by big Fortune 500s, just like SolarWinds, they may want to target you. Fraud, this is still huge too, right? Again, this could start with phishing, but this is tricking people into wiring money, sending it places that you don't want it to go. Changing who the receiver of a payment's going to be. There's a lot of different flavors of this, but the gist is money going to some account that's not the one it was supposed to. Advanced persistent threat, right? So this is what we believe SolarWinds was, right? This is a nation state attack. And everybody always asks this question, well, what am I doing? Chris, what are you doing in my security program to make sure I don't get hacked by China? And my answer usually is, well, what kind of budget do you want to give me? Well, I'll give you a 6-figure budget. Well, that's great, because I need an 8-figure budget to at least know that they're in your stuff. I'm not going to stop the Chinese. I'm not going to stop the Russians, because that's also not realistic. You don't stop somebody with those resources. At best, you detect them and respond quickly and make it enough work that they move on to something else. But in the same, if you were targeted by the US, I should say, I don't want to pick on certain countries. If the NSA is targeting you, I hate to say it, the NSA has got more resources than you do. So no, if you're a 20 employee company and you're going to give me 5 figures for a security budget, we're probably not going to keep the Chinese out. And that's good to understand. And I kind of expanded this a little more in this slide. I use this a lot just to understand a little bit of who are the people that are attacking me and why. The nation state, as I've talked about a lot already, they're really looking for things that are going to give a competitive advantage to their country, trade secrets, these kinds of things. Organized crime has moved very, very heavily into things like ransomware and fraud because it's a lot safer for them than things like selling, firearms and drugs, other face-to-face transactions, things that put them more at risk of being arrested or otherwise physically harmed. They've invested heavily in things like ransomware because they're safe and big money makers, and they continue to be. Hacktivists are going to target your company and really just try to make you look bad. Insiders, right? My own employees, right? They may steal information and they're going to have different motivations. And that's good to understand because every company has different threats they're going to deal with. They're going to be a little different than others. Some of you will worry about some of these things more than others. A little bit depends on, how do you make your money and who do you do business with? So why should I care about security? Because your customers do, right? If you're selling to Fortune 500s, they probably care. Depending on the business you're in, it'll matter more than in others, right? If you are selling software that's going to handle personal identifiable information, your customers care a lot about what you're doing for security. If you are providing janitorial services and you show up to clean the carpets, they probably care a little less. You still might get a questionnaire. Depending on what you do for your customers will determine how much they care. Your regulators do, right? And I'll give a few more examples of that, right? But every year we've got more and more regulations. So whether your customers are pushing you or not, the regulators may, and even if you're in a space that's not that regulated yet, you may be soon. Maybe one of your competitors doesn't, right? Maybe you're trying to figure out how do I show a little bit of competitive advantage. There's a peer that has similar products, but I don't think they do a very good job of security. They don't do multi-factor auth. I don't think they have a security officer on staff, or they've already been hacked and it's been public. Well, maybe you can lean in on security and say, look, our product's just as good as theirs, and we take security a lot more seriously. Cyber insurance coverage is shrinking. So I've talked about ransomware. What's happening with ransomware is a lot of people have cyber insurance policies that will cover them when you have a ransom attack, and they will actually cover the payment, and they will cover the forensics and legal costs, which can be great for the customer. The problem is the insurance industry has had their payouts go up exponentially year after year after year the last several years. Every time I talk to my broker, it's kind of a depressing conversation in the cyberspace. It's gotten very tough. And so they are demanding more and more. They're not writing policies if you don't have multi-factor auth or don't have EDR solutions or incident response plan and other things. Or they're saying we'll do a 50% co-insurance. Oh, this is great. You'll pay your premium, pay your $100,000, and then the $2 million in cost to clean up your mess. Well, you're going to pay half, whereas it used to be you pay the premium and be out. This space is literally shifting every single month when I talk to my broker. So if you're not keeping up on it, if you got an idea of where it was maybe a year ago when you looked at a policy, I can tell you the way it is today is different. The way it is 2 months from now will be probably even different from that. In general, you probably care to protect your business, protect your revenue. If you're not secure, bad things can happen, right? I talked about regulations. Everybody who's in healthcare, they've got to deal with HIPAA. We've all probably heard about that one. You may not have heard in the insurance space. It's a great example. A couple of years ago, the people that worked with insurance weren't really regulated for cyber. And then the industry came up with a self-standard called the NAIC model. And that is now being passed in slightly different forms, state by state by state. We really seem to struggle to pass cybersecurity and privacy legislation at a federal level in the US for maybe obvious reasons, right? But at a state by state level, that's where this has happened for a while. That's why we have things like CCPA in California. That's why even before that, we had Massachusetts that had a stricter privacy law. In this case, New York passed a strict law, NYCRR 500. Other states are following suit one by one, which frankly is very difficult to track. So if you're in an industry that's not regulated, it may be coming if you deal with anything sensitive. CMMC is another new one. So anybody in the supply chain for the Department of Defense, that doesn't mean you're a primary contractor, right? If you're Boeing and Lockheed, yes, you have to get CMMC certification. But if you are a provider that sells pencils to somebody who's a subcontractor of a subcontractor on a Boeing contract, You may also fall under this. You're at the lowest level. You're going to come maybe a couple years from now as they finally get around to you, but you're still going to fall within it. This is a program where DoD is trying to certify the entire supply chain they do business with. It is a massive thing. We're really at the tip of the iceberg. It came out last year. It's another example of something new you may not have heard about. PCI you probably have. Anybody who takes credit card payments falls under PCI. This is an industry standard. This is basically run by the card brands, Visa and MasterCard. Privacy legislation, right? So GDPR, that's Europe. CCPA is California. There's probably other stuff coming by state in the US. These have fines associated, and these have rules that say if I call you up and say delete my information, you have to. And if you don't know where my stuff is at, then you get fined. They're getting more aggressive on this front, and I find a lot of organizations struggle just with knowing what data they have and where it's at. If you're smaller, if you're just starting out, you're way ahead of maybe a very large Fortune 500 who's been at this for a while. Different for regulations, certifications, right? So SOC 2, ISO 27001. These are things that are voluntary. I've been involved in a lot of this stuff. I'm actually a certified ISO auditor. These are really great ways to show your customers that you're secure. Oftentimes, if we get these things, these will speed up the vetting process. The questionnaire they were sending you with the 400 questions, you might be able to say, hey, I've got a SOC 2. Can you read that report and tell me if there's anything else you're curious about? And it can simplify your process. Sometimes they'll still hit you with questionnaire, but it can help a lot. And then a lot of these regulations, right? HIPAA, PCI, NYCRR, they require these companies to vet the vendors. That's you. People realize they're becoming more reliant on third parties and cloud providers. SolarWinds, Excelion's another big incident that happened lately. These are increasing scrutiny, and everybody's realizing that a lot of stuff isn't in-house. They rely on companies like yours. And so how do I know I can trust you? In the Fortune 500s, right, the PNC banks of the world, they have massive vendor management teams, but even worse, they often outsource a large part of their vendor management, which means there's a third party that doesn't know you, doesn't know your business, has a very cookie cutter process, which can be very painful to go through. So how can I use this competitive advantage? How do I kind of make security work for me? Customer questionnaires. If we can get ahead of these things, if we have good answers, if we have a SOC 2, then we might win deals faster. Or win deals we wouldn't be able to get before. The reason why I usually get a SOC 2 or an ISO at my customers is because their customers are saying, you're going to need this to do business. They get asked that enough times, we'd say, we're going to do it. The smart ones say, none of my competitors have this. Let me go and get this flagged a wave before they do, and that'll differentiate me. And that kind of goes to the next point, compliance certifications, merit badges, so to speak, SOC 2 and ISO, they build confidence. You can list all these things on your webpage. Your sales team can run around and tell all their prospects, oh, we are ISO certified. You should be able to trust us. And so that might even get you, opportunities you wouldn't have had in the first place. And this last one's huge. It's usually cheaper to do security sooner. And I know at a startup, it's tough because you have so many things you could do. But I can tell you doing security earlier on before you've built out your software or your systems too far, it will cost you less money. When you do it at the very end of the life cycle, we say, okay, the product ships next week. Can we do a quick security check? If that's when we do it and we find problems, you're gonna be delayed. And you're gonna spend a lot more money and time fixing those problems. Security is a disadvantage. So these are probably obvious. Some of them. If we have breaches, those are going to lose customers. They kill the confidence those customers have in us. If we have downtime because of incidents, because of ransomware, we're going to lose business. They distract your team from your core business, right? Even if you manage to navigate the thing, all the people who are trying to make your product better are now just trying to keep the business afloat. In loss of data through ransomware, in some cases have caused businesses just to shut down entirely. They don't know how to recover. They can't navigate it. They just say, we're going to declare bankruptcy and just move on. So when should we care about security? As I've alluded to, when we're going after Fortune 500 customers, they're going to care, so you probably should care. If you're going after regulated verticals, if your customers are in healthcare and retail and government, you're probably going to get a lot of security questions. If your software or other parts of your business take sensitive data, personal information, credit cards, you're probably going to need to care about security. When you're getting a lot of security questionnaires from your customers and having trouble answering them, that's when you probably need to care a little more. When your competition is getting breached, okay, well, maybe you don't want to be next. So I realize I've flown through fairly quickly. We're almost at 12:30. We've got another webinar coming up in May. In that one, we're going to talk a little bit more about what to happen if you actually do have an incident or a breach at your organization. So stay tuned. We'll be sending folks more details on that. And with that, I'll see if we have any questions in the chat, or if you've seen any, Tara.
Yeah, we did not get any questions during. If anybody has a quick question, you could write it in chat.
I'm a fast talker in this one. Folks might not have had time to really process everything I was saying. I think I can see we're recording this, so if you've got kind of questions, if you want to kind of get a second swing at this and digest it better, feel free to reach out to us, follow up, and we can kind of help you get access to the content. If you have other questions about security, about what to do if something bad happens, me and my team are always here for you. It's what we do. We're always happy to take those calls and consult with people. I just like talking to people and helping with their problems. So consider us a resource to you and your teams should you have those kind of questions. And I guess with that, maybe we'll close it out, and we'll look to maybe see some of you guys in the next session. And thank you all for your time.